G'day, welcome back. I drove to the local mall recently and went to charge my Tesla, only to find that the charging stations were fully occupied. This led me to think back to only a year ago when mine was one of the only Teslas in town. I could always be sure of being able to charge my car at the mall. This problem will eventually be fixed as more charging points are installed, but it did make me think, what will it be like to own one of the last ICE vehicles in a few years' time? There are going to be a lot of changes, and gas stations closing are only going to be one of the casualties in this transition to electric vehicles. Will your business be one of them? G'day and welcome to Steve's Tesla. This is my channel dedicated to electric vehicles and renewable energy. Subscribe now and let's drive. Today in Australia we are approaching the 5% tipping point where electric vehicles are starting to appear everywhere and the take-up on EVs will accelerate rapidly. I'm driving around my town and I'm looking at all of the industries that currently support keeping motor vehicles on the road. There are petrol stations everywhere, and in some locations we have competing petrol stations right next to each other. There are automotive repair centres. There are shops selling automotive spare parts and accessories. Car wreckers. There are windscreen replacement facilities. There are tyre supply stores, clutch and transmission repairs. There are panel beaters to repair vehicles after collisions. As electric vehicles take over, will all of these businesses still be viable in just 5 or 10 years' time? Let's also give some consideration to taxi services and Uber drivers. Are these businesses that will still be viable in maybe 10 years' time? Not all of these businesses are going to survive. If we look back at the transition from horse and carts to the original Model T Ford, some viewers will remember these photos from a previous video showing the transition in New York from 1900 to 1913, during which time New York transitioned from 100% horse and carts to 100% petrol vehicles in just 13 years. Think of the industries that were transformed in that short period of time to support horse and carts. There would have been saddle makers, farriers to manufacture horseshoes, feedlots for feeding and watering your horse. There would have been parking facilities. There would have been people involved in picking up horse poo and keeping the roads clean. There were clothing manufacturers. There were also horse and cart service centres to fix wheels and manufacture new carts. Apparently buggy whips were a specialty product at that time. All of these industries had to transform quickly from 1900 to 1913 as petrol vehicles took over. Initially, there were no petrol stations at all. Very early motorists had to go to a pharmacy and purchase a product known as motor spirit, which I believe was some form of refined kerosene. There were no motor mechanics. Motorists fixed their own cars. There were no tyre supply stores. All of these had to be created, and many of them, of course, came from people who'd been working servicing horses and carts, and who had successfully made the transition to motor vehicles. There would have been many, however, who would either not accept the changes that were taking place, they resisted and hung on to the old economy, or maybe they were just unable to compete in the new gas-powered world. So how will this transition play out in Western economies? We only need to look at what has happened in Norway, where they are almost at 100% of all new vehicle sales being electric already. This is 5 years ahead of when they thought petrol cars would be replaced. In Norway, petrol stations are closing. Some of them have already transformed into EV charging stations. But because so many EVs can simply charge at home, there is not the need for as many EV charging points at service stations as there were for petrol pumps. The motor mechanics are still servicing gas-powered cars, however these are reducing in number as EVs do not require servicing in the same way or as frequently as gas-powered cars. Tyres, of course, are still in demand, but do you think they need clutch and transmission service centres anymore in Norway? And what do you think has happened to the value of second-hand petrol cars in Norway, as everyone is buying electric vehicles? Where I live, in New South Wales, there are approximately 2,600 service stations. Petrol stations are the obvious contender for restructuring as more and more electric vehicles replace petrol vehicles. One by one, these petrol stations are going to have to transform to the new economy, or they will go out of business. We are starting to see the green shoots of this transition for petrol stations, with a few of them now starting to install electric vehicle charging points. Ampol in Australia seem to have recognised the need to make this transition. We are seeing electric vehicle charging stations appearing throughout the country. In some parts of the world, entrepreneurs are building charging stations that include restaurants and restroom facilities. At one time, Elon Musk said that Tesla will be building some specialist charging facilities and that this could be a whole new line of business for Tesla. There are about 200,000 gas-powered cars on the road in my geographical area. If your gas-powered car is one of the few that is still on the road in, say, 10 years' time, do you expect that all of the 506 service stations that I currently see in my region will still be operating? Do you expect that petrol will be the price it is today? We have been told that it will still be possible to buy petrol in 30 years' time. I think some people are expecting they will simply be able to pull into a service station as they do today. The reality is more likely that they will have to drive quite some distance to one of the very few remaining gas stations, and the price of petrol could be anything. Let's say $20 a litre. Why will it be so expensive? Well, because the cost of extracting oil, shipping that oil around the world, refining that oil, distributing it to a petrol station, and then dispensing it to just a few remaining motorists will be as expensive as it is today. But that total cost will be divided amongst just a tiny number of consumers. I think that we can agree that companies selling tyres and consumables like windscreen wiper blades will still have a viable business with electric vehicles. But what about automotive mechanics? Electric vehicles do not require any form of mechanical servicing. They do not consume oil. They do not consume clutches or transmissions. So all of the mechanical repairs associated with a traditional gas-powered car are no longer required with an electric vehicle. Electric vehicles still consume brake pads. However, the regenerative braking capability in electric vehicles mean that brake pads will probably last 3 to 4 times as long as they do on a gas-powered car. Let's also give some thought to panel beaters and windscreen repair service facilities. Modern electric vehicles are already proving to be much safer than gas-powered cars. This is in part because electric vehicles have modern safety facilities such as adaptive cruise control, automatic braking, and in the case of Tesla, enhanced autopilot, and in quite a short period of time, full self-autonomous driving. It's extremely unlikely that two self-driving autonomous vehicles will ever collide into each other. Certainly the expectation is that Tesla self-driving will be safer than a human by the end of 2022. However, this is quite a low standard. As in the United States today, over 100 people die on the roads every single day. As automated safety features become more common and better, there will be vastly fewer collisions, so the number of panel beaters and windscreen repair stores is likely to rapidly decline. This leads me to think also that as autonomous vehicles are perfected and robo-taxis are introduced, the business of being a taxi service or an Uber driver is very likely to go away. I encourage my viewers to have a look at a recent video by Best in Tesla, where Hans explains that Tesla's full self-driving software has the ability to transform many hundreds of thousands of Tesla motor vehicles into unmanned robo-taxis in a very short period of time, and that these cars are already on the road. I'm sure there are viewers who will be sceptical of this and expect that full autonomous driving will be decades away. I'm of the opinion that momentum is building and that we will see full autonomy very soon. Driverless robo-taxis will replace traditional taxis and Uber drivers within the next several years. It is hard to imagine, however, this transition is accelerating quickly. A growing number of countries have banned the sales of new petrol-powered vehicles from 2035. A few have brought that forward to 2030, and in Norway they are bringing it forward to 2025. What will this mean for the businesses involved in supplying spare parts? Second-hand petrol cars will still be available for a long time in the future. I can envisage a situation not unlike Cuba, where they were cut off from the Western economy for many years. In Cuba, motorists had to be very innovative to keep their vehicles on the road, and as a consequence, there are some classic motor vehicles still driving around on Cuban streets. Will we have a similar situation in Australia, where second-hand motor vehicles are plundered for spare parts to keep an ever-diminishing number of gas-powered vehicles still on the road? Or will there be some government intervention at some point in the future, such as the United States had some years ago with the program they called Cash for Clunkers, the objective being to remove inefficient gas-guzzling cars from the streets? So we are living in fascinating times. I think if we were to drive along these same streets in just a few years' time, we will find that many of these existing car service and maintenance businesses no longer exist, or they will have had to transform dramatically to service the overwhelming number of electric vehicles that will be on the streets by that time. Hey, you may agree or disagree completely. Either way, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And please subscribe. Thanks for watching.